being here today at Citizen Climate Lobby Canada's Undaunted Conference. We're learning about how we can afford all the things we need and stay warm, as well as cut greenhouse gas emissions. So our next guest speaker is Christiana Guertin, and she's a research associate at the Canadian Climate Institute with a focus on mitigation, research, and climate policy. At the Institute, she supported and led various research projects, including their research on the affordability of heat pumps, which is so important to Canadians, and the transition of Canada's electricity sector. Her presentation will draw on from recent research, and it is titled Heat Pumps Pay Off, Unlocking the Lower Cost Hot Heating and Cooling in Canada. It's all yours, Christiana.
Oh, hi, everyone. As Kathy mentioned, my name is Christiana. I'm a research associate at the Canadian Climate Institute, which is a nonpartisan charitable research organization that focuses on climate policy. Within the Research Institute, we have a few streams of research, which include adaptation, mitigation, which is the team that I'm on, and then clean growth. And we recently added another stream, a fourth stream on Indigenous issues. I'm really happy to be here today to support Citizens Climate Lobby's initiatives and your latest campaign. So special thanks, Kathy, for organizing. Kathy mentioned I'll present findings from our recent research published and called Heat Pumps Pay Off. While I'm the only one representing the report today, I did want to recognize several other authors and my colleagues at the Institute who worked very hard on this report with myself. And they include my colleagues, Sarah Miller, Kate Harlan, and Ricardo Pelli. So with that, I'm going to jump in. This report, Heat Pumps Pay Off, is a part of the larger research efforts that we are conducting at the Institute, which is meant to examine the pathways in net zero in Canada's building sector. We're also very interested in looking at the affordability of the net zero transition for Canadians. So this report plays a major piece in that research. So as I mentioned, we have a few different streams of research from the Canadian Climate Institute, but this report is a joint report with our adaptation and mitigation team. So it focuses both on the resilience of heat pumps, well, the resilience benefits of heat pumps, and also the emission benefits of heat pumps. This is the first of two major reports that will be published by the Institute on the building heat sector. And the research that I'll present today is focused on the residential heating from a consumer and homeowner perspective. But our second report, which will come out earlier next year, will focus on the building heat sector from a network or systems perspective, and we'll look at it from a broader point of view. So we've also launched an online interactive tool, which will allow people and users to get a detailed cost breakdown for scenarios that may represent their situation. So later in the presentation, I'll bring us towards that, and I'll give a quick walkthrough of how our tool works. So first, I'll start off by introducing the benefits of heat pumps. So as I mentioned earlier, there are two benefits of heat pumps that we've introduced in this report. One, the resilience kind of perspective, and also the emissions perspective. Emissions perspective, heat pumps are very crucial in decarbonizing space heating and cooling in homes and buildings. Currently, the burning of fossil fuels for space and water heating in Canada's buildings account for 10% of Canada's total emissions. And the switch from burning of fossil fuels in boilers and gas furnaces or other fossil fuel furnaces like oil furnaces to electricity-powered heat pumps create immediate decarbonization benefits, especially true in regions where electrical grids are already powered by low-emitting electricity, like in Quebec, Manitoba, and British Columbia, for example. But even in other regions where that function on relatively high grid intensities, electricities with grid intensities, the heat pumps emit between 20 to 30% less carbon emissions than gas furnaces because of their high efficiency. So overall, there are many studies that have shown, and our study including the importance of decarbonizing the heating sector in Canada and the effectiveness of heat pumps in getting there. So from a different perspective, heat pumps are beneficial as they provide protection from extreme heat because they double as heating and cooling. Not many consumers know that heat pumps both act as a cooling and heating system, but they do. And as we've seen in recent events, with heat waves becoming more frequent and intense across Canada, access to space cooling is increasingly important. So from a resiliency perspective, heat pumps are better than traditional ACs to meet cooling needs because, one, as we'll show in our analysis, they tend to be cheaper, and two, they provide protection from extreme heat in a way that doesn't make the problem worse, whereas ACs tend to lock households into fossil fuel heating infrastructure. So after having gone over the benefits of the heat pumps, I'm going to dig a bit deeper into our modeling approach. So first, we modeled 5 Canadian cities, including Vancouver, Edmonton, Toronto, Montreal, and Halifax. Each of these cities reflect different equipment cost, governmental rebates available, energy prices, and climate conditions. Then we captured different building types, including different building ages. So the buildings modeled include single detached homes, townhouses, and 2 types of multi-unit residential buildings, or MURBs, one with a central heating system and one with in-unit heating system. And then finally, we've modeled 4 main equipment options. The first representing our business as usual scenario, which models gas heating with traditional air conditioning. And then we have 3 heat pump configurations, which include a standard heat pump with gas backup, a standard heat pump with electric backup, and finally a cold climate heat pump with electric backup. So one little caveat that I wanted to mention here is that you'll notice that in all the scenarios that model heat pumps to meet the household's heating and cooling needs, we assume additional costs to install and operate a backup heating system. So this backup or secondary heating system acts as a backup to the heat pump when the outdoor temperatures fall below the optimal levels for the heat pumps to work efficiently. And this temperature is known as the switchover temperature and varies slightly by region and by technology type. So above the switchover temperature, the heat pump provides all of the heating and cooling needs, while under the switchover temperature, the secondary system is engaged to help meet the heating needs. And while our model includes secondary heating systems in all of the heat pump scenarios, some buildings may not, in fact, require backup heating, depending on the climate conditions, the building envelope and design, and the specific heat pump technology. So with that said, I'm going to go over a few key items important to understanding our approach. And first, so we've calculated how heat pumps compare to gas heating and traditional AC by using the measure of lifetime cost. So lifetime costs include both upfront equipment and installation cost, as well as average annual operating costs over the lifetime of the equipment. And again, here we're assuming equipment cost on a 2023 date, so assuming that equipment is bought today. We're not including falling prices or potential falling prices for heat pump technologies, which vary based on different upfront cost for heat pumps today and different projections for energy prices, both the fossil fuel prices and both electricity prices. And then we'll explore a little bit how these sensitivities impact they don't necessarily impact the results all the time in our results, but we'll see how they play a role in the cost effectiveness of heat pumps. And then finally, I want to point out that the underlying assumptions in the model are intentionally conservative. We include these different upfront costs for heat pumps because we do recognize that the market is maturing. So heat pump technologies have a range in costs, whereas gas furnaces stay very steady. And as I mentioned earlier, we include backup heating systems in all homes, although in some regions and in some building types, they may not need backup systems. So with that said, I'll move on to the results of our analysis. So first, we found that despite our conservative assumptions around heat pump technologies, heat pumps are already the lower cost than gas-fired space heating with air conditioning in most cities and building types that we modeled. This is especially true for single detached homes, townhouses, and MURBs with in-unit HVAC systems. So the exceptions tend to be in MURBs with central heating systems because they have very high heating loads and they're charged commercial prices rather than residential prices. But that's not the case for all MURBs with central heating. It's a selected few, some in Toronto and Vancouver we found. So we'll see a bit of that in the interactive tool, but I also want to highlight here that while we did model different building ages, we found that heat pumps are cost effective even in older, often less efficient homes. It doesn't change the merit or the case for heat pumps, whether you're in a new or old home. The only thing that changes is the rebates that are available. So actually sometimes heat pumps can appear to be cheaper in older homes that qualify for rebates where new homes don't. So for our second, result, we found that the main driver of cost competitiveness across cities are relative gas and electricity prices, as well as climate conditions. So what I mean by this is that in regions with relatively low electricity prices in comparison to gas, such as in Montreal and Halifax, heat pumps consistently outcompete gas heating with cooling. And the opposite is true in places like Edmonton, where gas prices are relatively cheap in comparison to electricity. As a result, in Edmonton, the business case for heat pumps is often marginal, but sometimes favors gas heating and cooling. So our third finding is that policy and programming, specifically governmental rebates and the scheduled carbon price increases, support the cost competitiveness of heat pumps. So for this one, I'm going to pull up a graph here to help display this finding. And what our analysis has shown is that the existing government policy supports the business case for heat pumps and sometimes tips the business case in favor of heat pump technologies. So this is especially true in Toronto and Vancouver, which are displayed in this figure. And here we've broken down the cost to see the impacts of carbon pricing, which you could be seeing drawn up in that upwards arrow, and the impacts of rebates, which is shown in that black arrow, kind of drawing the cost down. We focus our attention to the first and third column. So the first column representing the gas heating system with AC, and the third column representing the heat pumps with electric backup. And you can see that without carbon pricing driving the cost up, driving the cost of gas heating up, and the available rebates driving the cost of heat pumps down, the first column, again, the gas heating with AC, may outcompete heat pump technologies. So again, I've displayed Toronto and Vancouver because they represent cases where the business case for heat pumps would have been marginal or would have flipped in favor of gas heating absent these policies. But our findings and our analysis has shown that in places like Montreal and Halifax, heat pumps are already cost competitive, even absent these policy programs. With that said, we do recognize that the rebate programs available do help support consumer uptake from the upfront cost perspective, because heat pumps tend to be have higher upfront costs than gas furnaces. So with that, I'll move back to our final result. So finally, we found that from a property owner's perspective, the fully electric heating and cooling systems tend to be the lowest cost option, outcompeting heat pumps with gas backup. This finding is especially true in Vancouver, Toronto, and Halifax, but varies in Edmonton, where the gas prices support the hybrid systems, and in Montreal, where the rebates are quite high for heat pumps with gas backups. So now going through a quick summary of our results, I'm going to navigate towards the online interactive, which is Our URL is heatpumpcalculator.ca. It's online and live now. So as I mentioned earlier, this online interactive tool is really, we built this to really allow users to compare the cost of heat pumps to gas heating with AC, while allowing the user to navigate different circumstances, such as different cities, building types, and sensitivities. Here, I can click the Get Started button, and we'll see that we first have here to choose a city. So I'm going to go with Montreal, since that's where I'm located, but we have Vancouver, Edmonton, Toronto, Montreal, and Halifax. And we also have an average of all 5 cities for maybe people who aren't living in any of these regions, or may not have similar energy prices or rebates available or climate conditions to the cities that we have here. So I'm going to go with Montreal. Now it brings us to select a building type. I'm going to go with, we have a single detached house, a townhouse, and an apartment, which is the MURB with in-unit HVAC systems, and then the 20-unit building, which is the MURB with central heating. So I'm going to go with a townhouse. And then here, the final choice is the building age. Like I said, even in some of the older homes, heat pumps tend to be more cost effective. So I'm gonna go with a 1940s home, especially Montreal is very old construction. So we'll go with that. And here we see that the lowest cost option in Montreal under these conditions is a cold climate heat pump with electric backup. And this is just going to be like a first kind of big overview of the results, but if we go into the full results, we get a bit more details. And here we can see the comparison of the different 4 technologies with a breakdown of the cost options to select through the different kind of sensitivities. So one thing I wanted to mention here is that you'll see that we have the gas service fee even in the all electric scenarios, and that's because we didn't want to assume that consumers were totally getting off the gas system because they may have gas cooking or gas water heating and would still be paying those fees. But if a customer or a property owner were to go fully electric and to cut off from that gas service fee, we would see even higher savings in those scenarios. So here I'm just going to flip through some of our cost sensitivities, and you'll notice the prices here for the heat pumps will change and things will jump around a bit, but oftentimes heat pumps do remain more cost effective. And then one other option that we have here is the with or without financing. So in our baseline assumptions, we do assume like high financing, which is sometimes higher in heat pump scenarios because of the high upfront cost, but it's also sometimes drawn down because of the rebates available. And one last thing that I want to show is that we have a detailed view. The detailed view, you can see the cost breakdown of what is built into this total average annual cost. Have fun, everyone, with that. I hope it's helpful. We really do hope that this tool is used for people to get a bit more clarity on what the cost of heat pumps are. With that, I'm going to jump back into my PowerPoint. Now I'm going to move on to some barriers. So yeah, after having gone over the quick summary of the results and walking through the online interactive, we've seen that heat pumps is already the lowest cost option for most households today, making it the best choice from a cost perspective. Yet, we've seen relatively low uptake across the country, suggesting that other barriers are holding people back from choosing heat pumps when they replace their heating and cooling systems. So while research into consumer motivations for heat pump adoption in the Canadian context is quite limited, we've based our findings on barriers from emergent studies, lessons from other jurisdictions, lessons from some successful examples of pockets in Canada which have seen high uptakes of heat pumps. So with that said, the first barrier relates to consumer confidence. So while heat pumps are becoming more common across Canada, information gaps persist regarding their performance and their cost. So the information gap is part of the reason why we wrote this report and developed the digital interactive tool, again, to help the consumers understand potential cost and performance. But we found that the consumer confidence is undermined for the following reasons. First, lots of information of cost and performance of heat pumps is based on outdated information, which relies on data from earlier adoption of heat pumps. In the earlier models of heat pumps, there were complaints about subpar performance in cold temperatures, noise issues with the older models, and accounts of improper installation. But since then, the technology for heat pumps have improved. We've also found consumer confidence is undermined in certain places in Canada because there's a lack of supplier readiness and contractor expertise. So this lack of information and access to the technology undermines consumer confidence. And finally, another reason why consumer confidence can be low is that any heating and cooling replacement decisions are made with a high degree of urgency when an existing equipment fails. So the urgency in replacing the technology makes it less likely that people are willing and able to spend the time to research a new technology that they're not familiar with or that they think may be risky. So the second barrier, as I pointed to earlier, is the high upfront cost. While we did find that heat pumps are usually the lower cost over the lifetime of the equipment, the upfront cost of heat pumps remain high. This creates a barrier for consumers who are making the purchase decisions. First, because the households tend to weigh upfront cost and discount other benefits of heat pumps, such as low operating cost and the ability to both heat and cool. And secondly, because people have little basis to understand how energy prices will change over time. So again, both fossil fuel and electricity prices will be changing, but not having foresight on how they may be changing, especially given the scheduled carbon tax increases, limit a consumer's ability to understand how the lifetime cost will play. And then finally, another point I want to draw is that relatively high upfront costs pose a particular barrier for lower income households and renters, meaning that households that are often most vulnerable to climate change may be locked out of seeing the lifetime savings of heat pumps can deliver. The third barrier relates to the complexity of available rebate programs and supports of heat pumps. As we had seen in the graphs before, rebates certainly support the cost effectiveness of heat pumps, but we find that access to these programs is a challenge for many households. These programs are often complex and challenging to navigate. There are multiple support programs offered by different levels of government, depending on the jurisdiction. This information is often decentralized, published by different sources. So gathering the information of available rebates and supports can be difficult. Furthermore, each program has a different qualifying criteria, including different equipment eligibility, different approval times, and different application processes. So while the provincial, you may have access to a provincial rebate, that application process will be different than the federal application process. So the complexity of information and the application processes really make it difficult for homeowners to understand what programs are offered for their specific situation. And then one last burden about the current program structures is that the existing rebate programs confirm eligibility and disperse payment only after the installation process is complete. This includes the federal Greener Homes program. So in these situations, households have to carry significant upfront costs for installation before they are reimbursed. And the cost, which is a cost that many lower income households are unable to carry. So this is a major psychological barrier for households who are not sure if they will be approved and will receive the rebate funds. So finally, that leads us to our last barrier, are structural barriers. So structural barriers, particularly facing renter households, restrict the ability of many households to access heat pumps and cost-saving benefits it provides. So most rebate and loan programs target owner-occupied households and single detached homes, and owners of condos are ineligible for rebates, as are renters. Many of the barriers facing renter households stem from the fact that while renters typically pay energy bills, landlords pay for the installation of the heating systems, and this creates misaligned incentives, as there's a limited incentive for landlords to invest additional capital to install heat pumps when the benefits, the lower bills and a more comfortable home environment, and resilience to extreme heat accrue to the occupants rather than the owners. So as a result, again, this exacerbates the vulnerability to certain populations who are already vulnerable to extreme heat and rising energy bills. So with that, I'm going to quickly, I'm going to try to quickly as possible go through some of our policy options for addressing these barriers. So first, we found that the existing policy mix makes heat pumps the lowest cost heating and cooling options for most households in the cities we modeled, but there may eventually be a case for sunsetting some programs as cost of heat pumps fall in the future. However, we find that these supports currently need to target lower income households in vulnerable communities such as renters, and those types of rebates and support programs will likely need to be maintained over long term. However, until the market for heat pumps become more mature, we recommend that all orders of government maintain their current policy and rebates. Secondly, we found that governments should streamline existing programming and improve equity of access. So these improvements to existing programs could include loosening requirements for home energy audits as a condition of eligibility. It could also include harmonizing equipment eligibility and other eligibility criteria across the different jurisdictions, and improving access for renters by broadening the eligibility for landlords to access rebates for rental properties. In addition to the improvements that I mentioned, we also believe that governments should consider streamlining programs to reduce or eliminate upfront cost for consumers. For example, through point of sale rebates. That way, the customers don't have to bear the upfront cost. Provinces should support one centralized organization serving as a single point entry for consumers seeking information, support, funding, and services for home heating and cooling. This should include heat pump installation, energy retrofits, and access to funding or financing. And then fourth, government should establish a maximum indoor temperature limit. This recommendation will help protect Canadians from increasingly frequent extreme heat and improve equity of access to life-saving space cooling. Finally, provincial and municipal governments should require non-polluting and high efficiency heating and cooling in new buildings, especially in regions where all electric heating scenario is already the lowest cost option. And this recommendation would avoid extending gas infrastructure to new housing developments and other buildings, infrastructure that may end up stranded and or contribute to elevated energy bills as the country decarbonizes the building sector. That's it for the presentation, and I guess we have questions now.
I wish you could hear the audience. That was really good. Okay, so are there any questions? Yeah, please come to the microphone over here.
Okay, I'll quickly respond. I see there's Roberta has a question in the chat, so I'll respond out loud. So yes, this report is very limited in scope. We wanted to just compare gas to heat pumps. So we don't include underground heating or geothermal heating, but our broader report will. Our broader report will look at the benefits of different types of technologies.
Okay, can you hear me, Christina?
Yes, I can.
Totally awesome. I'm really psyched.
I'm glad you liked it.
Congratulations. This is such important work, and you've really made it easy for, a typical homeowner to like figure out what the heck's going on here. So that's really awesome. Good job.
Thank you.
Yeah. So it really struck home for me when you were saying that it's not unusual that these decisions are made like on the spur of the moment because it's getting cold and I turn on the thermostat. Oh damn, the thing's not working. You call the repair guy. He comes in. He says, you know what, this thing's got to be replaced. And then a decision gets made really pretty quickly on what's going to happen in the midst of inadequate information. So I'm just trying to put myself in the place of that contractor who's talking to that homeowner, and I ask myself, what's the incentive for the contractor to bring up the issue of, hey, maybe have you thought about a heat pump? And so I'm just wondering about that.
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and as I mentioned briefly, it wasn't something we got deeply into the report, but we do recognize that supplier readiness is an issue, and again, that is why we have that range of heat pump cost, because as talking to contractors, we found that in homeowners and people who have done installations, we found that there's a huge range in what the cost for heat pumps can be for homeowners because the lack of supplier readiness and expertise and competition. So I unfortunately I don't have like well, one thing that is working in Atlantic Canada is that streamlined process of getting heat pumps installed. There are lots of organizations working on it, Efficiency Canada, for example, and lots of supports providing a kind of streamline here. This is the new technology. This is the technology that everybody is installing into their homes, and the market is a bit more mature. So I think it's a matter of time and waiting for the market to mature for heat pump technologies cost to fall a little bit even further. Their upfront costs are still high so that the suppliers can be ready.
Right. So this is something we'll talk with our CCL colleagues here, see if we can have an impact on that, and also what you mentioned with the landlords. And the other thing I thought of, again, is you mentioned about the energy audits, because that would be a great opportunity if the homeowner had an energy audit, at some time when they're not in crisis mode.
Mm-hmm.
And at the energy audit, whoever they're talking to could say, well, this house would be a prime candidate for changing over to heat pump, and you could save yourself a lot of money. And that way it's not happening while they're in crisis mode. Anyway, all that being said, I'll turn it over to the next question, and just thank you so much. It's really been great.
Thank you. Thank you for your questions.